Computer. And I want to thank everyone for coming. I think we're 8:59 a.m. And to keep Todd's schedule on track, I want to thank him very much for coming to us today. We were supposed to be having breakfast, and contrary to my normal commitment to have you out of the room before 8:45, here you are at 9 o'clock joining us for what would typically be our breakfast. And I made muffins. Sorry I can't share them. And thanks to everyone. We have 43 people who are here now, so it looks like everybody's kind of coming in online. So just a couple of housekeeping issues. Q&A will be live, and Lisa Grills will be watching those questions come in. A few of you did send questions in earlier, either through your registration or through an email to me, and we've proceeded to provide those either to Todd, or I've added a couple of points to some of mine. But please feel free to raise your hand, ask a question, and then we'll bring them in if we can. I understand Todd's got about 10 minutes to 15 minutes of speaking points, and we'll go from there. So I'm going to pass it over to Greg now, who would like to thank you for coming, and then we'll get started with the official webinar.
Thank you, Jill. Good morning, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Greg Sudds, and I'm the president of the Belleville Chamber of Commerce. We began 2020 with hopes of prosperity and success for the decade ahead. In just under 4 months, the landscape has been completely upended. Moving forward, businesses from all sectors may be looking for answers and direction. This morning, MPP Todd Smith, the Minister of Children, Community and Social Services, has graciously joined us to discuss some questions which were submitted in advance by our members. If time permits, we will take additional questions for the Minister to respond. Minister Smith, we look forward to your comments here this morning, and we thank you for joining us. At this time, I invite Minister Smith to lead our discussion. Thank you.
Thanks, Greg. Thanks, Jill. Thanks, Lisa, to put this together. And unfortunately, we're not able to enjoy seeing each other face-to-face over a good breakfast, but we are here in our various offices. Some of you are lucky enough to be at work. Some of us are stuck at home, and we've been there for a long, long time. It really is great, though, to be able to connect with so many familiar friends and in the friendly city over the telephone and over the Zoom, which has become a little bit more of a routine for me, that's for sure. I have so many of these teleconferences and Zoom meetings and business for Skype and all these types of meetings now that I never thought I would be in this world, but here we are. These are indeed strange times. I've been fortunate to spend more time lately in the Bay of Quinte riding, which is a good thing. But I still, even though I am here a lot more often than I normally would be, I still feel a bit distant from the community, as I'm sure we all do, not being able to walk through the doors of your businesses or your operation because of COVID-19. Working on our response to COVID-19 at Queen's Park has been really, really difficult and fast-paced, as we are in uncharted territory. As you know, my whole career in government, 9 years now, has been dedicated to helping reduce red tape and remove barriers to businesses. I've spoken about it many times at chamber events over the years, but in the last 2 years, our government did help create more than 300,000 jobs in Ontario, only to see more than that number halted in the blink of an eye. So it is strange indeed to be where we are right now. My office used to deal with opportunities and grants. Staff are now dealing with questions about who can open their doors and who can't, and limiting access to their venues. It almost seems surreal some days. It's been difficult, but it's been necessary as well. And the modeling about illness and deaths shows that the people of the Bay of Quinte and the people of Ontario have done a great job at doing what we intended to do, and that is limiting the spread of coronavirus, no matter the economic cost. And I know it's frustrating that this period of quarantine has produced unique challenges for all of us in our businesses. For those who remain working and those who had to close their doors over the past month, you're all dealing with a new world. We all have questions we can't answer easily these days. I'm going to give it my best shot a little bit later on in our webinar, but there was one constituent recently who came in and she was telling me a story, and this is something that I've never had to deal with before in this office, but she was quite frustrated about the fact that she couldn't go out and buy a bra. So these are the kinds of things that people are facing every day. They want to go out and buy a bra. I was a bit surprised to hear that people were wearing bras these days because they didn't have to leave their house for anything. But anyway, those are the kinds of crazy things that we are dealing with in the office these days, as we are in a brand new world. Another person came in and asked my office to contact Pokemon Go. That's that little web thing where you follow around on the streets and have to pick up different prizes and stuff like that. And someone asked me to contact Pokemon Go to stop the quests that keep bringing traffic to particular businesses, because her daughter couldn't stop searching or wouldn't stop searching. So maybe those are the kinds of tools that we could use when we do start to reopen the economy to get people moving back into your businesses rather quickly. We've also had all kinds of tough questions about rents coming due without profits, businesses operating without social distancing, possible price gouging. You've heard those stories early on. They seem to have died off a little bit lately. And the scarcity of a whole range of items, from the craziness of the toilet paper rage to hair dye and other food items that are just a little bit more difficult to find on the shelves. They say that difficulty does breed opportunity, and we've really seen the ingenuity of our business community here in Bay of Quinte and right across Ontario. Companies that never fully embraced the internet have now moved on to online sales, which I think is fantastic. And met with the challenges of closing, some have adapted, I should say, by offering new curbside pickup and delivery services at their locations. You can really see the spirit of the community on display, and it is heartening. One such example is the Dugout Grill in the East End. Many of you know owner Jen French, and she's found a niche by introducing themed takeout nights via social media that were so successful, she sold out her supply a day in advance. And it's those kinds of stories which are heartwarming. She's not only helping her own business, but she's using her audience to help her suppliers meet their quotas by directly selling bulk items too. We've also been really fortunate that beyond their own supply chains, people in our community are tapping into what Premier Ford calls the Ontario spirit, and they're rising to meet our needs to help health providers through these times. Over in the county, you've heard the story of Kinsip Distillery, I'm sure, among the first in the province actually to convert its production line from bottles of alcohol to hand sanitizer. And I just love the trust in our community too. I mean, Kinsip puts these items out at the end of the driveway in a big wooden box, and people just drive up and pick up their hand washing and sanitizer that they're offering there. Here, Grant Cannon at Quinte Marine and Canvas, he was about to close his doors when he seized an opportunity to move from boat covers to masks. We've also seen local libraries and college professors get in the business of 3D printing, facial protection as well for our frontline healthcare providers. Procter & Gamble, as many of you know, is repurposing some of its space to do likewise, making the 3M N95 masks, or the N95 masks, I should say. Those are just a few examples of some of the great work that's being done. Thriving in this difficult time and in the aftermath as we begin to open up Ontario will depend on businesses being nimble and able to adjust. And we know that you're going to drive Ontario's economy as you always do. We'll be here for you. Already through our action plan, which was released last month, we've provided $6 billion at the provincial level in cash flow relief through a 5-month interest and penalty-free period on most provincially administered taxes. We've increased the employer health tax exemption, providing $365 million in relief for about 57,000 employees. We've made electricity bills more affordable for small businesses and farms through a $1.5 billion reduction in electricity costs and the freezing of time of use rates at off-peak levels for 45 days. We've deferred the quarterly education property tax payment by 90 days to give municipalities flexibility to provide property tax deferrals, provided $1.9 billion in new financial relief through WSIB through deferred payments for 6 months. We proposed a new corporate income tax credit, the Regional Opportunities Investment Tax Credit, which is going to be great news as we start to emerge from the pandemic into the new normal. There will be that tax credit available for new businesses, new corporate income tax credit rate. More recently, we've worked with the federal government to introduce a commercial rent support program that will reduce rents for many businesses by 75% for April, May, and June. Renters would be responsible for 25% of their rent. Landlords will hopefully agree to forego 25%, and the governments would cover the balance. It applies to businesses who pay less than $50,000 in gross monthly rent and who have either temporarily closed or seen a 70% drop in pre-COVID revenues. We expect the intake actually is now open for that program. In addition to these measures, we have advocated for our partners in the federal government to offer additional support for businesses, and they are set to deliver with wage subsidies and interest-free loan programs, and we've seen a huge uptake on that. Meanwhile, we've created action plans to keep vulnerable populations in long-term care and congregate settings, and provided a $4 an hour shift premium. It was announced on Saturday by the Premier in frontline sectors facing challenges to maintain staff, and many of those are in my current ministry at Children, Community, and Social Services. But we're working to maintain reasonable precautions to see the decrease in community spread necessary to reopen the economy in the next 2 to 4 weeks as prescribed and described in the framework announced by Premier Ford on Monday. As we work diligently to create those conditions, we're planning for economic recovery, and my colleagues Vic Fedeli, the Minister of Economic Development, Job Creation and Trade, who was here in the fall for a big announcement, and Rod Phillips, the Minister of Finance, they'll be heading the Ontario Jobs and Recovery Committee. It'll be instrumental in helping you put us back on track in the province. We'll be looking for your input through the Ontario Chamber of Commerce to ensure that you have the tools and support that you need. And that committee will look at all resources at our government's disposal across all ministries. We're committed to making Ontario the self-sustaining economic engine of Canada again. And through it all, I'll be here and my staff will be here at my office, as we have been throughout the pandemic, to listen to your concerns. And I will definitely amplify those concerns within caucus and within our cabinet. So keep connecting through my constituency office, and I'll work to ensure that we all get through this together. Just a quick note as well before we start to take your questions. The Minister of Labour is expected to be out, I believe, tomorrow, and he'll be sharing some of the guidelines on how we can start to reopen the economy again and what that will look like. I think everyone understands that when your businesses are able to reopen, that it's not going to look exactly the same as it did when you closed 6 or 7 weeks ago. There will be new measures that are necessary, and tomorrow we should have some more news on this. Every day there's been new nuggets coming from the provincial government and certainly from our colleagues on Parliament Hill as well, and also from our mayors who have been great partners throughout this whole process. So I'd like to thank Steve Ferguson and Jim Harrison in Prince Edward County and Quinte West, but most importantly, because we're on a Belleville Chamber of Commerce call today, Mitch Panchuk, the Mayor of Belleville, for his partnership throughout this, because we really have had to work together to really sort of navigate through this new normal. So with that, thanks for joining us this morning, and I'm happy to take any questions that you might have.
Okay, so Todd, thank you. I think I'll start with some of the things that we had mentioned, but we got the announcement on Monday, and what will be the signal for the Ontario economy to begin to reverse the current closures? Is this about a benchmark number on a confirmed case line for the province, or will different municipalities see different approaches? Any ideas on that?
Yeah, so, you know, I can tell you that we've been struggling with this and discussing it for many days now on what it's going to look like when the economy reopens. You've heard the Premier say many times, it was a very difficult decision to shut down the economy, extremely difficult decision for all of us to do that. I think it was the right thing to do, and the proof is in the numbers. You only have to look a little bit to our south in New York State or over in Michigan to see what could have potentially happened here in Ontario. Fortunately, because of the measures that we took early by shutting things down, we were able to avoid that kind of snowball hitting our hospitals. Certainly, we've had our problems with our long-term care facilities, But he also says, when he says how difficult it was to close it down, it's going to be even more difficult to slowly open it up, because we're going to have to be picking different segments of the economy to open up. So I don't see it happening, Jill, on a municipal by municipal basis. I see it happening at a more provincial level. One of the things we want to avoid, and I know this is a big concern for the mayor of Prince Edward County and the folks down there, is that, well, Prince Edward County has only had 2.5 cases. Why don't we just open Prince Edward County up? Well, then everybody from Toronto is going to inundate all of the businesses in Prince Edward County. And the next thing you know, Prince Edward County is going to get hammered with COVID-19. And we saw this happen, actually. There is a best case out there, or a worst case, I guess, on how this kind of approach doesn't work. And that was in Japan, where one of the touristy islands that they have off the coast of Japan opened up early. Next thing you know, everybody was coming in from Tokyo and Osaka, and that little island became covered with COVID-19 cases and simply couldn't keep up. So I see this being as a slow, measured opening up of the economy. We'll certainly be working with our medical officers of health to do that appropriately. I think there are some fairness issues that we're going to want to deal with very early as well. And I think there's a question coming up on that, so I won't preempt that question, but I see this happening very slowly over the next couple of weeks. And as far as a number goes, you did say, is there a number? You know, I know the number 200 new cases has been thrown out there, but that's not necessarily, you know, a number that will dictate whether the economy starts to open up or not. I know the medical officer of health has mentioned that. The premier has mentioned 200 new cases. Right now, we're over 400 still, and we've been kind of steady between 400 and 500 every day for the last probably 10 days. We did have a little bit of a spike yesterday in the numbers after 3 days of steadily declining. You know, we're having a lot of discussions, and including a very lengthy one last night at Cabinet about how we can start to unlock the economy again.
So this is where I guess the other question is, people are getting a little restless. We're starting to hear that things are getting better. We've had few cases kind of with the exception of long-term care kind of being hit now. But if you've been home for 6 weeks in offices where physical distancing may be an option, can we return to work? For example, could I go back to the log cabin?
Yeah, so I think, and that's what Monty McNaughton, our Minister of Labor, will be unveiling tomorrow. Not necessarily telling you that you can go back to the log cabin, but telling you that when you do go back to the log cabin, these are the kinds of rules that you're going to have to abide by and follow to make sure that you can keep the doors of the log cabin open. And that will go for anybody who's listening out there this morning that operates a small business in the community. You know, you're probably, and I don't know exactly what the minister has in his guidelines that are going to set out, but I suspect there's a very good chance that you're going to have a hand washing station, you know, some kind of hand sanitizer at the door of your business. And even in some of the larger stores that have been allowed to remain open during this process, limiting the number of people that come into your establishment. So you're not going to be able to have 25 people in the log cabin, not that they would fit anyway, Jill, but you'll be limited per square foot, most likely, on how many shoppers or customers or clients that you're going to be able to allow into your facility. So I think you're going to start to see some of those types of measures coming out tomorrow with Minister McNaughton.
But I could in theory go back.
Well, in theory, yes. In theory, you can go back.
Locked.
Yeah. But you know, as we're doing here at my office, and my constituency office has remained open, sort of, mostly virtually, but I've had 2 staff working here. Jennifer and Adam have been working in the office daily, and we've removed David, so everybody knows David Joyce out there. David's working from home, and he has been throughout the pandemic. You know, everybody's been working, and probably working harder than ever before, quite honestly, because the number of calls that have been coming in have been unreal. And Lisa MacLeod, one of my colleagues in Cabinet, I was talking to her the other morning, and she said in her 15 years in politics, she's never worked harder than she has for the last 7 weeks, because the phone just hasn't stopped ringing. So to answer your question, I think slowly we will see a return to work, as long as the numbers keep going down, and we'll see that happen over the next couple of weeks, I think.
Very good. So you actually mentioned Lisa McLeod, and there is a piece to this. You've mentioned the rent relief, but I'm wondering if you see whether or not the provincial government will provide additional funding for businesses. So we see envelopes for tourism being increased, and many of our boutique stores and family-run restaurants depend on tourism traffic for survival. Is it possible that they might be considered within this criteria, for example?
So what we've been doing and the approach that we've been taking at the provincial level is to work with our federal counterparts as much as possible on these programs. Instead of having a provincial program, have worked together to create a national program. The other piece is that, you know, our hands are somewhat tied at the provincial level, although we've certainly come out with significant amounts of money that we never ever thought, and assistance that we never ever thought we could do. But given the trying times that we're in, the economic statement that Minister Phillips released last month was a $17 billion document. It just blows my mind to think about the fact that we were able to put something like that together in a couple of weeks in the midst of this. Something like that would take months and months to put together. But the approach that we've been taking is to work with the feds, and the federal government does have the ability, because of their financial situation, which is unlike ours. We're in a pretty restrained environment in Ontario these days because of debt to GDP and provincial debt and those types of things. So we have been partners on a lot of these things. You know, we came out with the commercial rent, and the feds were obviously a big part of that earlier this week. The wage subsidy was another piece where we're partnering with the federal government. Right now, the plan is not to come out with anything else, but as you can see, things have been changing daily, and so I don't know if the federal finance minister has been talking with Bill Morneau up on Parliament Hill, or the provincial finance minister has been talking with the federal finance minister up on Parliament Hill on anything else here. But I know there are still a lot of questions about how this commercial program is going to run out. We did come out with the Tourism Development Fund, and it's something that it continues to evolve as well. So Minister McLeod has been on the phone with a lot of the folks in the Quinte region and right across the province that are involved in the tourism sector. I don't know, Jill, if you've been on some of those.
I have. Yes, absolutely.
And we do want to continue to hear from those folks on the ground as to how we can best assist them when we do get back to normal.
Right. So there's one other kind of big question I have. Certainly seem to present a reality check on what our essential needs should be, and the people who provide these services. You know, great news about the increase in wages for our essential workers. But the government has already mandated an increase in wages. Do you see a reverse effect being incurred for non-essential businesses with regard to mandatory Sunday closures or reduced hours? Do you see that being part of the future?
Quite possibly. I think for the immediate future anyway. I think what we've seen happen in a lot of the stores that have remained open is that they do take a day to shut down their business and make sure that everything is cleaned properly. There's more of an emphasis on that than maybe ever before on ensuring cleanliness in our workplaces. Monty McNaughton will have more details on what that might look like, I think, in his, and I don't want to oversell what he's going to announce tomorrow, but I think it is going to be pretty interesting for those in business to understand, you know, some of the changes that they'll have to make to their business. And it may be, you know, 1 day a week shutdown, I'm not sure, but those details will be unveiled tomorrow.
Good. Thank you. So we have a couple of questions that I did get. There was one about, so a couple of issues that kind of have taken, I understand, like page 6 news, but the Ontario Teachers Unions, have all of those been settled, and what was the final outcome?
Yeah, so there's tentative agreements with all of the teachers unions. That was one of the biggest stories, certainly before COVID-19 hit, and it has fallen to the back pages, and people probably aren't aware, but as of last week, OSSTF, which is the Ontario Secondary School Teachers Federation, the high school teachers, also came to the table, and we reached a tentative agreement with them. As far as details go, because they haven't been ratified, I probably shouldn't talk too much about what's in the deal, but we were able to ensure that we respect Bill 124, which was the 1% cap on wage increases. So that was something that the government did set out to do, and we were able to achieve that. So that's good. There are a number of other things in there that are actually very, very positive, I believe, for our students and for our teachers, and certainly for the taxpayers in Ontario. So they still have to ratify those deals, and when they do, then the details will be made public at that time.
Yes, and I suppose online learning features completely differently now.
Isn't that crazy how that changed? Wow, turned on its head.
Yes. So now, just further to that, the Minister of Education announced that the public schools remain closed until May 31. Do you expect, if they reopen in September, will there be social distancing required? Will masks for students and teachers be a requirement? And a new piece to this is, will international students be allowed in the fall? Any said?
Yeah, so yes, I believe so. You know, obviously things are going to be different going forward. I think as far as the way the classroom looks in the future, it's going to change probably as well, especially the immediate future. I know that Minister Lecce is looking at a number of different models as to what school would look like if it reopens on June 1st, and there is the possibility still that kids could go back on June 1st. I think it's highly unlikely that all of the kids will be going on the first Monday back. He's looking at different models and considering options. So we could have half the kids go on Monday, the other half go on Tuesday, and that same first cohort go back on Wednesday. That kind of a look, just to make sure that as much as possible that we are self-distancing or social distancing. It's going to be tough with kids, but I know there's a lot of different options that he's looking at. Masks, as you mentioned, are masks now going to be somewhat the new norm? I think in the immediate future, there's probably a good chance that they will. And he's also working on plans for the fall. Should this continue or a second wave come back, you know, what are our schools going to look like, public schools and post-secondary, you know, when school returns? I think the fact that post-secondary was able to move to online as quickly as they did is we're going to see more, and there was a lot of that in post-secondary anyway, where the kids were doing online programming. I think we're going to see that probably grow, and I think there's a good chance that we may see that type of learning, particularly in secondary in secondary schools, continue to grow as well. One of the parts of the teacher agreement with the unions was that we were going to make the online learning not mandatory but optional. But I think given the state that we're in right now, where so many kids have chosen to take up the online learning, and that's always going to evolve how it's going to look and how accessible it's going to be. But there may be a lot of students that really like that option coming out of this, and more may choose to do online learning in high school maybe than ever did before.
Well, it's always been a way of accessing education when it wasn't available in a classroom. So certainly having that option. I mean, we started it 20 years ago at Loyola, so
Yeah.
certainly involved heavily in that. So the other question that we had, and this is a good one, non-essential departments and department stores, they're not really being treated the same as non-essential stores. Protocols of sanitizers at entry, masks and physical distancing. Some of these things could allow non-essential stores to be open, which is kind of what you've talked about. But it does seem that there are a few stores that have an unfair competitive advantage when they offer groceries, but then also have places to buy bras. And now you've got them roaming freely, and so where everything else is curbside delivery or online ordering. So I guess in fact, we heard an example of one person who went to one of these stores, and when they, from a long-term care facility, you know, able to go out and do their own shopping, when it turned out that that's where they had been, they were then put on a 2-week quarantine. So we're seeing this kind of thing happen. So is there anything from the province that might mandate that additional departments should be cordoned off to walk through traffic?
Yeah, at this point, I don't see us making that change at this point. And I understand, you know, the issue as you describe it. I know it was seen as unfair for a lot of different businesses that weren't able to open. I think at this point now, what we're looking at is allowing those businesses to be able to open, so that they can compete again with the big box stores. There were many difficult decisions that were made 6 weeks ago to close down these stores, as I mentioned, and how best to ensure that people could still get items if they needed them. Certainly, groceries was the number one thing, and medications at pharmacies was up there as well, and that's why we made those stores essential businesses, so that people could get their groceries, their food, their medicines that they need, and I know sometimes it seemed like maybe it was arbitrary what could open and what could close, but I think now we're at the point where we won't be putting up any barriers to getting into the clothing section at Walmart, but there's a very good chance that we will be allowing stores that sell clothes to open up as well, with proper safety in place. So again, stay tuned for Minister McNaughton tomorrow. He's going to appreciate the fact that I'm plugging him so much, giving him such a spotlight on the Chamber of Commerce webinar this morning. But I think you know, you will start to see you know, what our plans are for reopening the economy, and I really hope that we can get going on that as soon as we possibly can.
Okay, very good. And I mean, I have to ask a question about home care workers and home care provider, member of the Ontario Personal Support Worker Group. I think the biggest thing right here is, especially if masks become a requirement around, you know, or everywhere, the delay in mandatory testing, how are we going to deal with PPE? Like, is there going to be kind of an added impact? Do we understand the need for this, especially for all levels of essential workers? And how is the government going to support that? I mean, certainly you've dealt with the better wages, but, you know, I mean, there's the question about why it took so long to take action. I think we can appreciate that we all didn't know what was going to happen and how we should move forward. But do you see anything else coming down the line for essential workers, and especially those who may have, in the PSW world, that may have been kind of forgotten in the beginning?
Yeah, and I wouldn't say they were forgotten. I think one of the challenges throughout this whole process has been trying to pinpoint where COVID-19 was going to hit and where it wasn't. And I think, you know, as you've been able to see, we did an amazing job at the Ontario government at freeing up space in our hospitals and making sure that we were prepared should New York City happen in Toronto or in Belleville. It didn't happen there. You know, we went to all those great lengths to make sure that the space was available in the hospitals, and then it hit our long-term care facilities. One of the biggest challenges throughout this whole ordeal has been the PPE issue. And I think that's one of the biggest lessons learned, and the Premier has talked about it over and over again, and I know this has been his biggest frustration throughout this whole thing, is the procurement and how it doesn't happen adequately at the provincial government, particularly when it comes to healthcare. And he's talked about the fact, and now we've got the Prime Minister talking about the fact too, that no longer will our country or our province have to rely on medical equipment coming from other jurisdictions or other countries, trying to get it from other government leaders that don't want to give it to us because they have an outbreak in their own country. So, I mean, this was one of the real challenges that we faced was, you know, we had enough PPE to get it into the hospitals. And even then at the start, you'll recall it was a little touch and go. We used to hear from our folks at Quinte Healthcare regularly on the fact that, boy, we've only got a week's supply left.
Right.
And if we do start to see what's happening in New York, we're going to be in one heck of a lot of trouble. Fortunately, that didn't materialize. And then we did start to get some shipments in Certainly, it takes some time for our domestic supply to build up. We had so many different companies, as I mentioned off the top, from Procter and Gamble, and all of the auto sector have done an amazing job in the auto parts sector. And those were stakeholders of mine when I was the Minister of Economic Development, Job Creation and Trade. You know, Woodbridge, which makes auto seats, is now making the masks. And we've seen, you know, Magna and Linamar and Martin Rea and those types of big auto parts companies switching over to make ventilators, which fortunately, again, we haven't had the need for ventilators, but certainly we have had the need for PPE, and we now have the supply. I'm happy to say that in the developmental services sector, the group homes, which I'm responsible for in my ministry, major shipments went out last week to all of our group homes, and touch wood, we've been able to avoid the types of outbreaks in those group homes. With the exception of maybe one at Participation House in Markham, which has been in the news, a larger institutional type setting. We haven't had the type of outbreaks in those facilities that we've had in long-term care. So it's been a real challenge. Certainly we value the PSWs. I don't know if you know this, Jill, but I used to be a PSW. Before I got into broadcasting, I did it for 3 years when I lived in New Brunswick. I know what a difficult job that is, the commitment that goes into that type of care for individuals in the long-term care and developmental services sector. I appreciate the work they're doing. And I think that's why our government act is as quickly as we did put together this pandemic pay premium for the next 4 months to ensure that, you know, we do respect the fact that they're doing God's work right now. They really, really are going into dangerous situations.
Yeah, absolutely. So there was another question kind of along those lines, and whether or not the victim service workers, were they added to that? So these are first responders just making above minimum wage, no benefit programs in place due to the serious lack of provincial funding for their services. So is there a plan in place to discuss this at a higher level? So that's kind of specifically with victim services.
Yeah, and they did get funding as well. We put $2.7 million into funding for them. They were also part of the residential relief fund that the province put out as well. It's a $40 million fund for those that have transitional housing or shelter type facilities. They were able to access funding there for staffing, for PPE and those types of programs. So we understand the work they're doing, unfortunately, is necessary, especially during a pandemic. The numbers have been going up as far as domestic abuse cases in our communities. People are going a bit stir crazy, and it's tough sometimes. So we wanted to make sure that we were supporting that sector. My colleague Jill Dunlop is the Associate Minister of Children and Women's Issues, and she made that announcement several weeks ago. And then we made the Residential Relief Fund announcement quite a long time ago to support that side of things.
Okay, so now a couple of other things. This is more to do with how we might prioritize, and I suppose I'm advocating now on behalf of those types of businesses that are able to practice physical distancing because they're large and they're outdoors. And so we have a facility of 146 acres that would be able to comply with physical distancing measures, which I believe is a racetrack. And we also have a golf course and a couple of golf courses. And what do you think, how high up on the list do you think they'll be in terms of being able to open?
Yeah, high. And I think it makes sense, right? I mean, and common sense is what we really want to bring to the table here. You know, if there are businesses, particularly businesses outdoors, where the probability of passing COVID-19 along is minimal, then we should be moving to allow those businesses to reopen. I heard NASCAR, I was listening to Jack Miller this morning on the radio. I heard NASCAR is going to be opening up some of their racing and with no fans. And then golf too. There are ways to play golf safely. And I think that, you know, probably when it comes to tournaments and those types of things, it may be a little bit more challenging, where we all used to gather together under a tent and cheers each other with a nice cold one. and shake hands and give each other hugs and all those kinds of things. I don't see us rushing back into that kind of a scenario very soon. But there are ways where we can get the golf course open. Maybe we don't have tee times every 7 minutes. Maybe we have tee times every 12 or 15. Maybe you don't allow carts, or you don't allow 2 people in a cart. There are actually pins that you can put in now where you don't have to touch the flag pole anymore. You can just reach underneath and the ball goes underneath. So I mean, there are all kinds of innovative ways to do this, and I think certainly when it comes to the other determinants of health, especially around mental health, you know, we need to be able to get outside, go for a walk, hit a ball, and where we can limit physical contact, we'll have to continue doing that. But as much as we can get back to normal, I'm a big proponent of doing that, and certainly I've shared that with my colleagues many times.
Sure. Well, and further to that, we talk about these gatherings, and I mean, do you anticipate we'll be getting any direction from the provincial government regarding large gatherings, festivals, and concerts, in particular Canada Day or Waterfront, or local events that are on the fence right now, but planning has to move forward? We'd hate to cancel only to find out we could postpone or even go ahead.
Yeah. So as far as big events go, you know, we've seen concerts basically canceled right through almost to the end of the year. Sporting events, the big sporting events, it's going to be difficult with things like Waterfront Festival. I mean, if there's a way to do it safely, then there's the possibility. You're looking for provincial direction on what to do on some of these larger events.
I think that would be helpful, because the municipality is dependent on some of that information too, and certainly they can decide whether or not they're going to close their parks. But it would be awful to find out, very much like Japan opened their one island, it would be awful to find out that, you know, Canada Day in such and such area is going to be open, and we've canceled ours, and now everybody's going there. So that's the question.
Yeah. Yeah, and we've seen Canada Day canceled on Parliament Hill for this year. It's going to be virtual. I think Quinte West has canceled their Canada Day as well. I think probably the safe decision at this point is to cancel those types of events. Will there be direction from the province to do that? That's a good question, and it's one that I can take back to my colleagues. And if municipalities are looking for guidance on that, I mean, we still have the same rules in place when it comes to the size of gatherings. It started at 250, it went to 50, it's down to 5. It hasn't moved from 5, so we're still in that territory. So it'd be pretty tough to have a Waterfront Festival with 5 people.
You and me and Susan.
Yeah, it'd be a real fun time. But anyway, I'll take that back to the table and see if we can't provide some guidance.
I think it would be helpful for those who are just hanging on the edge right now to know that, you know, really there's a definitive decision that we are not going to be able to move forward with big, large events until September. I think the biggest concern is whether or not we cancel or postpone. And that, I mean, that's been our hesitation right now, is if we thought we'd be able to go forward in September with an event, do we, you know, just transfer those contracts over to a September date or Thanksgiving? So yeah, no, that would be helpful for sure. And so I'm just going to go back to one last question that we received in advance, and then I've got a number that we've got. We're sitting at 9:42, so we'll have, you know, a few minutes to take some of these questions that Lisa's been receiving. But we're going to go back to water levels. That's another thing that was really a big issue before all of this happened. And is the provincial government doing anything to pressure the Joint International Commission? And how do we sit there?
Yeah, we have, and we've been pushing actually for an Ontario municipal representative on the International Joint Commission to represent our municipalities. I know it was the biggest issue, thankfully, this year, because of some measures that we were able to push them to undertake. They were allowing water out into the Montreal Harbor for a longer period than what they had in the previous couple of years. And I think that's been quite positive for the water levels in the Quinte region on the Bay of Quinte and Lake Ontario. We haven't seen the type of flooding, and touching wood as I say this, we don't see the flooding that we saw in 2017 and 2019. And so we've been pushing for that. Steve Clark, who's the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing, my colleague from Brockville, this has been a real passion for him in particular. All of us have been raising this at the cabinet table, but and we were able to have the Premier reach out to the Prime Minister to look for that representation from local Ontario municipalities on that IJC, which is really, really important. Right now, the only municipal member is from Quebec. And so they're on the other side of the dam in Cornwall, and they're lobbying for one thing, and that would be commerce in the Montreal Harbor, while we're lobbying for the safety of our residents and their homes for the most part along Lake Ontario and the St. Lawrence River.
Yeah, fair enough. Okay, so a couple of questions here. I think you've heard this one before, but high speed is an internet issue for sure for some. And back to the whole, can I go to the office? I mean, I'm using Barry's computer. I'm hardwired in. We thought we had high speed kind of put into our home just like the week before, and it's still a challenge for me. But so can I go to the log cabin? Can we have employees going into offices if they can manage those physical distancing applications?
To access their computers. I mean, you know, this whole thing has been a complaints-driven type process. I think if one person goes into an office, you're probably not going to have a problem, especially when it comes to accessing internet service. I know that the strain that this has put on our internet service providers has been unbelievable, and because everybody's working from home now and all the kids are at home watching Netflix or whatever they watch, using their broadband, you know, I'm happy to say that Hastings County and the Eastern Ontario Regional Network just issued their RFP last week for the Eastern Ontario Regional Network to upgrade broadband and cellular service in the region again. So we will be seeing you know, upgrades to the way we get our internet service and cellular service. But this has been unbelievable, just the strain that it's put on our cell providers and our telecom companies, because everybody's using their equipment now. So obviously the online learning piece, coupled with people working from home and just people sitting at home using their Crave and Netflix and those type of platforms is causing real difficulties. So I think it's been an eye-opening experience on that level as well, that we do need to upgrade for sure.
Okay. And not a problem for a single person to go into an office if that's the case.
I mean, I wouldn't say so. You know, you're not supposed to be open for business, obviously, but if one person goes in to use their computer, I don't think that's going to be an issue. And again, watch for the directives tomorrow.
Sure. Okay, so what is the protocol when someone is tested with flu-like symptoms and they're being told to stay home and self-isolate for 14 days? Are we, I mean, is there an opportunity? Are we increasing the testing centers so that people can go? Because right now, if they just look like they might be sick, then they have to go home for 14 days. Maybe they just have a cold.
Yeah, so the assessment center is open at Quinte Secondary School. Individuals in the community can now make an appointment to go in. Quinte Healthcare actually opened that probably about a month ago, I'm going to say. And it was only open to healthcare staff at the time, frontline healthcare staff. Since then, we've seen assessment centers open in Picton at the arena and also in Trenton too, at Quinte West. So we do have these assessment centers open. If somebody does have cold symptoms or flu-like symptoms or wants to get tested, they can make an appointment to go in. We do have enough kits now. That was one of the problems too. We talked about PPE and the shortage of PPE in the early going. There was a shortage of the reagent that they use in the test kits, and the swabbing was more difficult. And that was one of the frustrations that the Premier had as well, was why aren't we testing as many people? And the answer to that question was we just didn't have the kits to be able to do it. So, fortunately now I think we're probably close to 14,000 tests across the province every day, and more individuals are getting the opportunity to go in and get tested if they feel like they may be exposed to COVID-19 or not sure if they have it.
Right. So do we have you for a couple more minutes, or?
Yes, I have to get on another teleconference for 10, but yeah, a couple more minutes is fine.
Okay, so quick question. Any chance the fire ban might be lifted for the May long weekend?
I don't know the answer to that one.
Okay.
I don't know the answer to that one, but I'll look into that one for sure.
All right. So, and yeah, certainly the testing question, that's great to know that. So do they just call the health unit? Is that the idea? Do you know?
I'm looking at Adam. I believe the health unit, it's Quinte Healthcare that's actually
Managing the
operating
testing
the
process?
facility.
Okay.
But if they call my office, we'll get them the answer, whoever that is that's
Well, you
asking.
know what? If you send it to us, we'll just send it to everybody who registered.
Sure.
Okay, that'd be
great.
fantastic. One other, two more questions if I could. One would be the Ontario, so we know that the student job grant program for the federal government has been kind of extended and anybody who was applying is good to go. But any idea whether or not the provincial student summer program will move forward? I don't think we've been able to apply for the last couple of years. So will there be any of that?
Yeah, I believe it is still going to be operational for this year. Of course, we're hoping that the businesses that participate in that will be up and running and be able to take on students. But yes, it's a go.
Will the submissions reopen by any chance?
They will, and if somebody has a question on that, we'll get them the information for that question
All right,
as well.
so maybe you could forward that one to me too. And
yeah.
Do you know whether or not the provincial or federal infrastructure funding for new builds that were applied for last fall are impacted, or will the government maybe see these as stimulus?
As far as municipal projects go?
Yeah, I think so. This is from, so this is from Dave Allen from the Y, who's kind of curious.
Oh, I see. Oh, yes, and I know what his interest is. Yeah, those infrastructure programs are continuing to go. As far as making decisions on who gets the funding, and so that's been I'll tell you the stream that David is interested in is the community stream, and there was tremendous interest from across the province for that stream. I believe we had over $11 billion worth of projects that municipalities and organizations applied for, and we've got $1 billion in that fund. So you can imagine how difficult it is making those kinds of decisions on who's going to get the funding. But Laurie Scott is the Minister of Infrastructure, and her team is working away at that. So I'm not exactly sure when they'll be announcing the successful candidates, but we make the decision at the provincial level because it's a federal partnership. The federal government will decide whether or not those projects get the green light, and then we'll announce them together whenever that date is. I think it is early in the summer when those announcements will be made, though.
Okay, perfect. Well, I'm going to maybe pass it over here to Greg just to say thank you, and thanks so much for your time. We'll let you get off to your other call, and thanks to everyone who was on the line. Thank you for joining us this morning.
Thanks, Jill.
Thank you. Again, Todd, I want to thank you very much for taking the time out this morning. I know you're very busy, lots on the go, but thank you, and keep doing what you're doing. We certainly appreciate that. So thank you.
Thanks, Greg. Thanks to everybody at the Chamber. Have a great day.
You as well.
All right, thanks everyone for being here. I will end the meeting now.
Thank you, Jill.